Hello, lovely people. Welcome to just a quick little update on my Read the World project.
Dooby 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 doo. Dooby 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 Sophie vlogs.
I have been loosely taking part in Read the World as a topic for this is my second year, 2025. In at the end of 2024, I did like a little roundup like this, which I will link down below. At some point, I will do a roundup of everything that I had read before I actively decided to start doing this consciously, covering all of those books as well. I think I'm about 40% through the world, so I've still got a way to go. I didn't do very well this year. I've read like 6 books and then I DNF'd one. I sort of got distracted by other reading projects that I'm doing, like finishing series. However, I thought I would still just talk you through those books in case you're also taking part and you want some inspiration and some thoughts. So first up is For Madagascar. I read Translations from the Night by Jean-Joseph Rabearivelo. This is poetry. I really enjoyed this. I did like Madagascar's like national poet. He died before Madagascar got independence, but so he was posthumously awarded sort of a lot of great honour. I really enjoyed. There's definitely a very reflective element to his poetry. What I remember most clearly are I really enjoyed a lot of the descriptions that were to do with nature, and they were so vivid. There were a lot of very natural and colourful sort of descriptions going on that I really liked. It also felt like they were very much poems like to do like concerned with like ordinary people and that kind of thing. It was described in the introduction as being sort of like a surrealist, and I didn't really get a lot of that from this collection. I don't know if that is stronger in some of his other works. I'm not 100% sure. But on the whole, I enjoyed dipping in and trying him. He's one who like people evolve as poets, and also he passed away quite young. So I think there's probably quite a lot more there still to explore, but I enjoyed this like first visit. For Eritrea, I read My Father's Daughter by Hannah-Azieb. This is a non-fiction memoir. Hannah-Azieb is a journalist, and she was adopted when she was very young from a orphanage in Eritrea because when she had been, I believe she had been sick as a child, and someone took her there to get treatment, and they said that her mother had died and she didn't have a father, so she was adopted and she was raised over in the UK. But that she actually did have a lot of family still in Eritrea, and they reached out and they contacted her, and this is her memoir about going to Eritrea and discovering this family and connecting with them. What I thought was really strong about this was the exploration of what it is like to be adopted. I almost actually wish I thought that the exploration of her connection to her Eritrean family was really gorgeous and lovely, and I felt very moved by it. I almost wish that there was just a smidge about like her relationship with her adopted family, just because I think it might have helped also contextualize like some of the conversations she was having with her Eritrean family. It read very. She's a journalist, and she writes for a lot of different publications. The writing style of it reminded me a lot of when you read. I will sometimes buy women's magazines. I used to read Cosmo a lot when I was younger, and they would have the longer form pieces that are usually exploring a topic that is sometimes political, sometimes to do with women's health, like quite a serious topic. And her writing style, I could tell that she is in journalism because it kind of read like a much longer version of one of those. So it was very accessible. I thought it was a really interesting memoir, and it was particularly interesting the afterword, where she writes about since she wrote this, the political situation in Eritrea has changed, and what that means for her and her family. I felt that was very moving as well. For Togo, I read Michel the Giant by Tete-Michel Kpomassie. I loved this. I thought this was great. I read this in a library book reading vlog, so I will link that down below because I did like check-ins along the way, which sort of encompass a lot of how I was feeling. This was just so interesting. Tete-Michel is obviously from Togo, but the sort of subtitle of this is An African in Greenland, because when he was younger, he found that he read this book that was about Greenland, and he just became like fascinated by the idea of it. It's, you know, this place that's covered in snow, the indigenous people who live there, they just really captured his imagination. And so as a young man, he leaves Togo. He initially goes to Ghana, where he has family, and he just like works and travels so that he can get to Greenland. And then he just spends a lot of time in Greenland, staying with different communities, getting to know them, understanding the way of life, sort of becoming like an honorary person in the community. It was just, I think it had that really, first of all, he seems like such a person who he was very courteous and kind to people throughout his journey, which meant that, like, for example, this man, I think it was when he was in France, who he was just very generous to one day, really took him under his wing and, like, adopted him, and he was like a second father to him, and he helped him get to Greenland. And there's all these, like, moments throughout where he manages to achieve what he wants to do because he is, like, a nice person to other people and they like him, so they're like, okay, well, while you're here, do you want to like stay in my house? And I just think he just came across as like a really nice person, and this like passion and interest he had in Greenland, and in then spreading the knowledge of Greenland. Like, he returns to Africa, he travels around different African countries, like telling people about what Greenland is like. There's just, I think I already said, like, I love when people who are passionate and interested, like, just tell you about their passions and interests. I'm just always like such a sucker for that, and that was really strongly in this, so I really enjoyed this one. After that, I'll tell you about my DNF, because that's next on my little list. I DNF'd for Equatorial Guinea, a DNF'd Black Girl from Pyongyang by Monica Macias. This is about Monica, who she was the daughter of, was it the president of Equatorial Guinea? Potentially. She grew up in North Korea because her dad was friends with whoever it was. It's been a while since I've read DNF the book, to be honest with you. Her dad was friends with him, so she grew up in North Korea. So it is in some ways like an interesting look at growing up in North Korea, what it is like to be a foreigner, because there were very specific rules about like what she can and cannot do and how she can and cannot interact with people from North Korea and all that kind of thing. Her father was overthrown, so that's why she spent so much time there. And then as a young woman, she then travels out into the world to explore the world more. Why I DNF'd this was, I didn't know anything about Equatorial Guinea before I picked this up. And then where I was at with the book when I decided to stop reading it was, her father is decried for a lot of things that he did that led to many, many people dying. And the route the book appeared to be taking was her just being like, well, I talked to my dad's best friend and my mum, and they said he wasn't that bad, actually. And I was like, I wonder if they might have a reason for saying that. I don't know. Something that I found throughout, not just when she was approaching the topic of her father and his legacy, was there did seem to be a lack of self-awareness and I guess self-reflection in some ways, because it also happened a few times with stuff that she was talking about when she was living in North Korea, about how she just always assumed people were X-way, and it wasn't until she left the country that she realised that sometimes people aren't. And there was just this lack of, I guess if you're brought up very sheltered, very privileged, slightly aside in this way, maybe you don't have that built-in, like, reflection aspect. I don't know, there were just a number of things where I was just like, why would you assume that? Why would you have never interrogated this idea before? I don't know. So I wasn't like loving the book anyway, and the library held needed to return, so I just let that one go. So I haven't formally counted it towards the project, but I'm mentioning it anyway. For Argentina, I read Thirst by Marina Yuszczuk. This is a sapphic vampire novel, which sounds exactly like my jam, but actually I was a bit disappointed by it, to be honest with you. This is two narratives, and it very much is sort of like first half of the book, second half of the book. So first half of the book, we are following this vampire, following how she was turned into a vampire, these little episodes of her life. Eventually, because of persecution of vampires, she gets on on a ship and she ends up in Buenos Aires. But the narrative structure is essentially like, she meets this person, they have erotic encounters, she eats them, she moves on repetitiously. And it was fine. I wasn't not enjoying it, but I did, by the end of the first part, I was like, okay, well, this isn't bringing anything hugely new to vampires for me, as a child who grew up reading a lot of vampire stuff. And then the second half of the narrative was the bit that really intrigued me, because it's about this young woman in Buenos Aires. She has been dealing with the passing of her mother, which was a very long process. Her mother had a considerable illness, and I will say that is something that was focused on and captured in great detail in a way that I think was very effective, but also in a way that if you are currently going through that process yourself, potentially not the book for you to read, because it was very vivid. She has a son, and essentially, like, she meets this vampire woman, they become a bit obsessed, stuff happens. I found it very slow. On the blurb, it said that it was going to be doing a lot of exploration of grief and motherhood and all this kind of stuff. And I do think, like, the grief to do with her mother's loss definitely was there. I think the motherhood aspect wasn't really, like, her child is just, like, not very present. I was like, why do you even have a child? Like, you wrote this for this woman to have a child, and this is what you're choosing to do with that relationship? I don't know. And the relationship between the woman and the vampire I just didn't find very interesting. It's one that I found quite disappointing, and the longer that I've sat with it, maybe the expectations I had, well, definitely the expectations I had did not marry up with the reality of the book. I feel sometimes bad maligning a book for not being what I expected, but I would have been happy with it not being what I expected if I had still found it more enjoyable. I just didn't. For the Republic of Congo, I read Black Moses by Alain Mabanckou. This was cool. This was, again, this was very much like a narrative of two halves as well. We are following Moses, who is growing up in this orphanage. I really liked the first half of this book a lot, because it is very much, the orphanage is like the whole world, and you're very much following all of the, like, petty politics, the power struggles, these, like, strong characters, in a way that I felt like the revolution is happening in the background, and the only experience of it that you get is, like, how it affects what is happening in this orphanage. So it's like, I liked that, like, inversion of focus, and I thought it was, like, a really effective way to show how these changes, like, trickle down and affect different things differently. There's, like, a really strong relationship between Moses and this friend that he has that I found really compelling. I found the second half of the narrative, he leaves the orphanage, and that side I felt a little lost, and I wondered if maybe if I knew more about the time period, the politics of the time, if that might have helped me get more out of it. Just because, you know, by the very end, the way that this book finished, I was like, I get it. I understand what you're doing. Okay, like, I see what you were building towards. When I was reading that second half, we flitted between things in a way that I was like, it felt less focused, and as a result, I felt a bit lost. I was like, where are we going? What are we building to? What's happening? So I really liked the first half. I thought the ending was effective. There is, like, a portion where I was like, ooh, but on the whole, I did enjoy. And then the final book I want to talk about is for Mauritius, which was Unearthed, On Race, Roots and How the Soil Taught Me I Belong by Claire Ratinon. I would recommend the audiobook of this. It is narrated by Claire, and I really enjoyed hearing it in her own voice. This is a lovely piece of non-fiction that Claire Ratinon, she calls herself a food grower, which I don't know why I say that every time. I just like that term. I think it makes the distinction from, like, this is not a nature writing book that is necessarily about gardens. It is a nature writing book that is about nature and growing food and soil and all that kind of thing. So Claire Ratinon, her family is from Mauritius. She grew up in the UK. She moves to America at some point, and she starts, like, urban gardening and teaching communities how to grow food and that kind of thing, which was all fascinating. My favourite aspect of this was the element that was to do with Mauritius, because she talks a lot about the history of Mauritius. She talks a lot about the nature of Mauritius, and I thought that those were done so well, and I really, really enjoyed learning more about Mauritius, but also getting this sense of like the physicality and I don't know, the love of Mauritius came through so strongly, and I really enjoyed that. There's lots of explorations throughout here, like as it says, like on race, roots, and how the soil taught me I belong. There's a lot of exploration of what it is like to be a black woman in this sphere. Really appreciated. I think every now and then, like the writing style of the book was like gorgeous and lovely, and then every now and then there would be these sections where we explored much more serious topics, which sometimes felt. The specific example I have is when we were talking about like eco-fascism. It felt a little bit like, and here is the dictionary definition of what eco-fascism is, and from the Wikipedia article, this is the things that happen. And I only critique that because I think the writing of the rest of it was so lovely that sometimes when we were doing these little and now we're going to talk about this, it like, I don't know, I felt like the style changed a bit. I don't know, maybe that is audiobook delivery rather than writing. It's hard to tell sometimes, isn't it, when you listen to something rather than read it. But I did really enjoy it, and I'm glad that I listened to it. It was a lovely little stumble upon in the library archives. Those are the books that I read for this project this year. I would love to hear, are you taking part in this? What's the best book that you have read for this? Any recommendations of any kind, please do throw them my way. And would you like a video where I talk about all the other books that I read before I started the challenge? I'm aware that I'm like, recommend me things, but you're like, I don't know what you've already read, Sophie. But yeah, anyway, I hope in the meantime that you've been having a lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.